The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, is universally remembered as a massive aerial strike, but the devastating surprise was actually preceded by a lesser-known, equally audacious naval operation. The Japanese Imperial Navy designed the assault to be a swift, comprehensive knockout blow, seeking to cripple the entire United States Pacific Fleet in a single morning. To ensure this devastating result, particularly against ships that might survive the main aerial bombardment, the Japanese planned a critical, clandestine secondary attack, the use of 5 specialized, 2-man midget submarines. This desperate operation involved 5 tiny, silent vessels known as the Type A Midget Submarines. Each submarine was launched from a larger Japanese carrier submarine far off the coast of Oahu on the night before the main air raid. Their mission was one of profound sacrifice: to penetrate the highly secured, heavily protected harbor of Pearl Harbor under the cover of darkness, avoid the anti-submarine nets and patrol ships, and deliver 2 torpedoes at close range against the largest American battleships. The technology of the midget subs was both advanced and terrifyingly rudimentary. The Type A midget submarines were small, electrically powered vessels designed for short, stealthy penetration missions. They were extremely difficult to navigate and control, particularly in shallow water, and were armed with 2 powerful 450mm torpedoes. Crucially, the vessel was not designed for retrieval. The Japanese Imperial Navy internally recognized that the mission was essentially a one-way, suicidal attack, as the chance of the 2-man crew surviving the escape and returning to the mother submarine was statistically near zero. The deployment began in the pre-dawn hours of December 7, 1941. The 5 midget submarines were released from their carrier subs and began their agonizingly slow, silent approach toward the mouth of Pearl Harbor. The challenge was immense. They had to navigate shallow, unknown channels, avoid detection by sonar and surface patrols, and slip past the formidable anti-submarine nets and barricades guarding the harbor entrance. Their goal was to enter the inner harbor in complete secrecy, positioning themselves for a close-range torpedo strike exactly as the aerial attack began, adding the final, critical element to the massive surprise assault. The meticulous Japanese plan for total surprise began to unravel hours before the main air raid. At 6:37 a.m. on December 7, 1941, long before the first Japanese Imperial Navy plane was visible, the crew of the United States Navy cargo ship USS Ward spotted the conning tower of one of the tiny midget submarines attempting to follow it into the heavily restricted entrance channel of Pearl Harbor. The submarine, designated M1, was maneuvering dangerously close to the channel entrance, making it clear that a hostile penetration was imminent. The nearest patrol vessel, the old United States Navy destroyer USS Ward, was immediately alerted to the presence of the hostile craft. The USS Ward quickly moved to intercept. At 6:45 a.m., the USS Ward opened fire on the midget submarine, sinking it with 2 direct hits and depth charges near the harbor entrance. This decisive action, carried out over an hour before the main air raid reached Pearl Harbor, resulted in the first United States shots fired and the first confirmed Japanese casualty of World War II. The sinking should have been the critical warning that saved the United States Pacific Fleet. The commander of the USS Ward immediately sent an urgent, high-priority radio message to command. "We have fired upon and sunk a submarine operating in the defensive sea area." However, this vital information was tragically delayed, dismissed, or miscommunicated by confused, skeptical, or overwhelmed watch officers who believed it to be a mistake or an isolated incident. The message failed to reach the necessary high command and trigger the highest level of alert that could have saved the ships still moored in the harbor. Despite the sinking of the first submarine and the alarm raised by the USS Ward, the remaining 4 Type A midget submarines continued their agonizingly slow, silent penetration attempts. Navigating the complex harbor defenses and the anti-submarine net, they pushed into the inner harbor, entirely unaware that the crucial element of strategic surprise had already been dangerously compromised. The failure of the United States Navy Command to react to the clear warning sealed the fate of the entire fleet, setting the stage for the devastation that was due to arrive at 7:55 a.m. Despite the early loss of the first midget submarine, The remaining 4 vessels successfully navigated the complex, shallow water defenses of Pearl Harbor. Their primary objective was to reach Battleship Row, where the majority of the United States Pacific Fleet lay moored. As the midget submarines silently crept into the inner harbor, they found themselves in the perfect position to deliver the final, critical element of the Japanese surprise attack. The immense vulnerability of the battleships, tightly moored together, presented an irresistible target for the torpedoes. The chaos and smoke of the main aerial attack, which began at 7:55 a.m., provided the perfect cover for the tiny submarines. As Japanese Imperial Navy dive bombers and torpedo planes saturated the harbor, the midget submarines were able to operate undetected in the confusion, with the United States Navy focused entirely on defending against the attack from the air. The massive noise of the bombardment and the general disorientation of the American defenders meant that the threat beneath the surface went largely unnoticed until it was too late. One of the midget submarines, designated M19, appears to have been the only one to successfully launch its torpedoes inside the inner harbor. Although the exact details remain controversial, evidence suggests that M19 fired its 2 torpedoes at the battleship USS Oklahoma and the repair ship USS Vestal, which was moored alongside USS Arizona. While the torpedoes may not have been the sole cause of the damage to USS Oklahoma, their additional impact contributed significantly to the devastation and the ultimate capsizing of the battleship, highlighting the potential lethality of the midget sub-attack. The United States Navy defense, once fully aware of the underwater threat, quickly focused their efforts on destroying the penetrating midget subs. Several vessels and patrol boats engaged the submarines, using machine guns and depth charges to eliminate the threat. During this period, the United States Navy vessel USS Monaghan actively hunted and sank one of the remaining subs near the point where it had successfully launched its torpedoes. By the end of the day, 3 of the 5 midget submarines were confirmed destroyed within the harbor complex. Of the 5 tiny vessels that launched the secret attack, 4 were quickly destroyed by the aggressive defense of the United States Navy. 3 were sunk within the confines of Pearl Harbor by destroyers and patrol craft. A 4th midget submarine was later found sunk near the mouth of the harbor, likely destroyed by a combination of depth charges and heavy machine gun fire, bringing the total loss of the raiding force to 8 men and 4 submarines. The immense cost of the mission was tragically clear, but the mystery of the 5th submarine remained. The dramatic end of the final midget submarine, designated M16, provided one of the most unexpected twists of the entire attack. Piloted by Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki and his crewmen, the submarine became disabled after encountering a coral reef and heavy seas outside the harbor entrance. After their torpedoes failed to launch and the submarine became uncontrollable, Ensign Sakamaki ordered his crewmen to abandon ship. He then attempted to scuttle the vessel to prevent its capture, but the currents were too strong. The disabled Type A Midget Submarine and its pilot, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, were washed ashore on Waimanalo Beach, Oahu, late on December 8, 1941. Discovered unconscious by United States Army soldiers, Ensign Sakamaki became the first official Japanese prisoner of war captured by the United States in World War II. This unique and unexpected capture provided the United States Navy with critical intelligence about the midget submarine program, though Sakamaki himself refused to cooperate with his captors. The fate of Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki was viewed by the Japanese Imperial Army with profound shame. The entire mission had been designed as a heroic suicide attack, and the survival and capture of a Japanese officer were considered a deep disgrace under the Bushido Code. Consequently, the Japanese High Command never officially confirmed the capture of Sakamaki, instead declaring that all 10 crewmen of the 5 midget submarines had heroically died in action. The incredible, tragic, and entirely secret mission was immediately shrouded in military obfuscation, leaving the full story hidden for decades. In the chaotic aftermath of the Pearl Harbor attack, the immediate priority for the United States Navy was damage control, salvage operations, and the grim task of identifying and recovering the dead. However, as the harbor was slowly cleared, the wrecked midget submarines began to yield their secrets. The salvage operations revealed the remains of 3 of the Japanese vessels within the harbor, confirming the widespread nature of the midget submarine attack and providing crucial physical evidence of the audacious, two-pronged assault. The recovery of the midget submarines provided the United States Navy with its first physical evidence of the sophisticated and deadly technology employed by the Japanese Imperial Navy in their surprise attack. Engineers and intelligence officers meticulously examined the wreckage of the Type A Midget Submarines, studying their design, propulsion systems, and torpedo mechanisms. This crucial forensic analysis provided invaluable insights into Japanese naval capabilities and their operational doctrine, helping the United States to understand the scope of the enemy's technological prowess in the early days of World War II. The discovery of the midget submarines also helped to piece together the fragmented timeline of the Pearl Harbor attack. The presence of these vessels confirmed that the Japanese assault was not solely an aerial one, but a complex, coordinated effort involving both air and subsurface elements. This realization underscored the scale of the Japanese planning and the depth of the surprise. It also highlighted the tragic failure of communication and alert systems within the United States Navy that allowed the USS Ward's early warning to go unheeded. Despite the recovery of the submarines, the exact impact of the midget subs on the damage sustained by the United States Pacific Fleet remained a subject of intense historical debate for decades. While one midget sub almost certainly contributed to the damage of the USS Oklahoma, the primary devastation was undoubtedly caused by the relentless aerial bombardment. However, the presence of the midget subs added a terrifying, unseen dimension to the attack, a silent threat that underscored the profound violation of the harbor's security. The sole surviving midget submarine, M16, which had washed ashore at Waimanalo Beach, immediately became an invaluable propaganda tool for the United States. The small vessel was salvaged, repaired, and subsequently toured across the entire United States to raise funds for the war effort and promote the sale of war bonds. Displayed publicly, the sub served as a tangible symbol of the treachery and technical sophistication of the Japanese Imperial Navy, reminding Americans of the nature of the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor and galvanizing public support for the war. Meanwhile, across the Pacific Ocean, the Japanese Imperial Navy reacted to the loss of the 9 deceased crewmen with immense national reverence. The midget submarine attack had been designed as a heroic, honorable suicide mission. The 9 fallen sailors were immediately elevated to the status of military heroes, receiving posthumous promotions and being collectively honored as the 9 gods of war. Their sacrifice was heavily utilized by the Japanese government to boost domestic morale and inspire young men to dedicate their lives to the emperor and the war effort. The fate of the sole survivor, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, stood in stark contrast to the glory bestowed upon his fallen comrades. Having been captured after his submarine became disabled, Sakamaki was viewed by the Japanese High Command as a profound disgrace for failing to die in combat. His capture was never officially acknowledged, and he was written off as killed in action. Sakamaki spent the rest of the war in American prisoner of war camps, suffering from deep personal shame and struggling internally with the Bushido Code that mandated death over surrender. Despite the tactical failure and immense cost at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Imperial Navy continued to utilize Type A Midget Submarines in subsequent operations. These high-risk, high-reward craft were deployed in attacks on Sydney Harbor and Diego Suarez, demonstrating the continued commitment of the Japanese military to using extreme, sacrificial tactics to strike at Allied naval power, even as the tide of World War II began to turn against them in the Pacific Ocean. The full scope of the midget submarine operation and the final resting places of the lost vessels remained shrouded in mystery for decades after World War II. For years, the United States Navy knew only the location of the captured submarine and the 3 wrecks found within Pearl Harbor. The deep-sea mystery finally began to unravel with the advent of advanced submersible technology. Deep-sea exploration teams, including those funded by the National Geographic Society, undertook meticulous searches in the waters surrounding Oahu, determined to find the final missing pieces of the audacious attack. The search efforts eventually proved successful, locating the scattered wrecks of the remaining Type A midget submarines outside the harbor entrance and in the surrounding sea lanes. The discoveries provided historians and naval architects with crucial, definitive evidence about the failure points of the desperate mission and confirmed the incredible challenges faced by the tiny two-man crews. The recovery and documentation of these vessels provided the United States Navy with invaluable, early intelligence on Japanese torpedo and submarine technology, allowing the United States to design better naval countermeasures later in the war. The sinking of the first midget submarine by the USS Ward at 6:45 a.m. on December 7, 1941, remains a critical historical point. This action, hours before the official bombing raid, fundamentally violated the principles of surprise attack and confirmed the aggressive intentions of the Japanese Imperial Navy before the declaration of war. The subsequent failure of United States Navy Command to act on this clear warning became one of the most painful lessons learned by the United States military during World War II, leading to profound systemic changes in communication protocol. The initial success of the Midget submarine program, despite the loss of all 10 men, provided the Japanese Imperial Navy with a brief but potent morale victory, transforming the deceased sailors into the 9 gods of war. This narrative of extreme sacrifice was vital for Japanese propaganda. However, the subsequent investigation by the United States and the eventual revelation of the full details of the attack cemented the midget subs as a tragic symbol of the high-risk, ultimately self-destructive tactics employed by Japan at the very beginning of the Pacific War. The legacy of the midget submarine attack is preserved in monuments and museums across the United States. The first midget submarine sunk by the USS Ward hours before the air raid was eventually raised from the seabed and put on display, serving as a permanent historical artifact and a silent testament to the very first military action taken by the United States in World War II. The captured submarine, M16, which washed ashore with Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, became a national symbol of the infamous sneak attack, touring the country to galvanize the American public's resolve during the darkest days of the war. The long shadow of the mission followed the sole survivor, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, for the rest of his life. After his release from captivity in 1947, he returned to Japan, where he struggled with the deep personal shame of capture that was intensely ingrained in the nation's wartime code. He worked diligently to rebuild his life, finding success in business, but he eventually dedicated his later years to speaking out against the horrors of war and nuclear weapons, using his unique experience as the first Japanese prisoner of war to promote global peace. The strategic final analysis confirms the profound nature of the midget submarine mission. While the subs did not deliver the knockout blow the Japanese Imperial Navy desired, their high-risk deployment revealed the early confidence, technological audacity, and willingness for extreme sacrifice inherent in the Japanese military's opening strategy. The silent, desperate efforts of the 10 two-man crews remain a chilling, poignant footnote to the massive air attack, underscoring the comprehensive planning behind the surprise assault. Today, the story of the midget submarines and the brave sailors of the USS Ward is fully integrated into the historical narrative of Pearl Harbor. The ship that fired the first shots was tragically sunk later in the war, but the recovery of its wreck and the final identification of the midget subs provide conclusive proof of the critical timeline. The entire saga stands as a powerful reminder of the extreme risks taken in the war's opening moments and the immense, enduring cost of the decision to launch the attack on December 7, 1941.